Professor of Sedimentary Geology at the University of the West Indies here at Mona, Simon Mitchell, says Jamaica could experience a magnitude 7 earthquake. He's here with us to tell us why he thinks so. Morning, sir. Welcome to Smile.
Good morning.
Hope all is well, sir.
Well, at the moment, yes.
What is sedimentary geology? What's that?
It's probably not the title I should have chosen, but I chose it
I know,
back then. But sedimentary geology is really dealing with sedimentary type rocks. So that's things like sandstones, shales, limestones.
Okay.
But it's a bit broader than that. Also the things that occur in them, so the fossils and things like that.
Okay. Okay.
So, yeah.
Why are you thinking that we might get a big one?
Okay, well, we've been seeing a string of earthquakes, particularly for the last, say, year and a half. And that is somewhat concerning. Now, people who have felt some, people certainly will have felt the relatively big one, the 5.6, which happened. And what we see is that these are basically releasing some stress, but as well as releasing stress, they also put stress onto other areas. So what we have faults that cross Jamaica. And there is a number of different faults. So the one that people know well about is the Plantain Garden Fault, which of course extends over towards Haiti, which was responsible for the 2010 earthquake there, which we all know about, and was felt here, of course. So, so that's one of the faults that comes in to Jamaica. But then there are another series of faults that go across the island. So, for instance, the Blue Mountains. Modern work has shown that it's going up by about 2 millimeters a year. It doesn't sound a lot, but if you add it up over many years, it's going up. Wow. Now, the reason it goes up is because there are faults on either side which are moving and actually pushing it up. So these faults are active. And in fact, those faults were some of the faults which actually were associated with the 5.6. So the 5.6, and I've actually been to pretty much the location where it was to try and map out the faults themselves at the surface. Of course, these earthquakes are below the surface. So what we're seeing is the different faults in Jamaica moving. Now, there are other faults in Jamaica. So there's one that goes across central Jamaica and sort of gets into about St. Elizabeth before it turns up towards the north coast. Most of the faults aren't so long. They tend to turn and change their directions, but just because of the nature of basically the geology of Jamaica. And that one moved. That one, we had 2 small earthquakes which were felt on that, and that was before the current ones which we've actually had. And then what we've now had is another one, which of course the 5.3 in the Wagwater Belt. Now, what I do is I work together with the earthquake unit, and we basically collect the data, we analyze the data so we can actually understand it. Invariably, it takes a bit of time to work these things out. You've got to solve the solution for where it is, okay, and that we use the network which we have in Jamaica. It's about 14 stations. They won't all be up at a particular time, or at least they generally are up, but they're not communicating necessarily with the actual main recording station in Mona. So we use a number to actually solve these earthquakes, and you might use some from other stations, so stations, for instance, in Cayman, stations in Cuba, and these sorts of things. And this gives us a very good fit on where the earthquake occurred.
You mentioned the Wagwater Fault?
The Wagwater Fault.
That's what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is you said it hasn't moved in maybe hundreds of thousands of years?
Now, the reason for that, or the reason we know that, is because we can look at the end of it, at the northern end of the Wagwater Fault. So you follow up into St. Mary, and you can see that it goes under some sedimentary rocks which have not been faulted, which means it must have moved. The last time it moved was before those rocks were deposited on it. So we actually do know that it really hasn't moved significantly for a good period of time. Now, the new solution we've got for this last earthquake shows it actually wasn't on the Wagwater Fault. It was close to the Wagwater Fault, but it was a fault that was actually cutting it. And a fault that's orientated east-west is a well-known fault, and it's called the Cavaliers Fault. And it's not that far north of Kingston.
I've read, and I think you told us once that we've had, I don't know if it's hundreds of earthquakes for the year.
Yes.
So then I don't remember you saying that we should be careful that we might have a big one after
I've said that we at some point will get one.
I know, but why are you saying it now, but you didn't say it when you were telling us that?
Because what I've been seeing is I'm seeing this progression across the island.
Okay.
So we started in St. Thomas. Now we went up into the Blue Mountains. And now we're on this central Jamaica fault, this Cavaliers Fault.
Right.
And they're sort of moving across. And my concern is that this is pushing stress further to the west, and that's likely to go on to one of these faults. So the Central Jamaican Fault is one, but there's also the South Coast Fault, which is probably the longest fault, and extends along the whole coast of the island, effectively. So if you go to Lover's Leap, for instance, you've got really steep, high cliffs. That's because that's the fault. And that's a very long one. And that one has the potential to produce a very large earthquake. 7 certainly, but even potentially up to an 8.
Up to an 8?
Potentially possible, yeah. Well, we haven't had a historical one, but we've only got, 500 years of data. We don't have a very long set of data. Like, if you go to Europe, you'll have thousands of years of data.
Yeah.
Here, we don't have that. But we can look back. We can do paleoseismic studies, so we can look at past earthquakes and date them just as you date archaeological remains. You can, if you find the right material, you can actually date them, and we want to extend that back so we have a better understanding of earthquakes in the past, which will help us work out what we call a return period.
With your experience, what kind of damage a 7 could do?
It really depends on 2 things. First is how deep it is, and then how close it is to basically populated areas. And the biggest areas that are going to suffer are the ones on the flat ground. So Kingston, Portmore are on flat ground. And the thing about that is it's soft ground. It's made of sediments. It's made of unconsolidated sediments. Whereas if you're on the limestones, they're not unconsolidated. They're very strong, and therefore you don't get such
damage,
an event, or the shaking is less. Let's put it like that. So the concern is areas that are flat, and of course areas that are flat are also areas where people build. So you've got that concern, and also because they're unconsolidated sediments, what happens is that the seismic waves actually get amplified, so they actually shake more. So it's one of the reasons why we often get a lot of reports from particularly Kingston metropolitan area, that we have had an earthquake, is because the waves are amplified there, and you're going to feel them. The other places are generally the ones close to where the earthquake actually happened.
Okay.
Are we the only Caribbean country that's seeing this kind of activity, or other Caribbean countries?
No, it's there's a lot of Caribbean countries that are actually getting this. So along the northern edge of the Caribbean, you can extend southern Cuba, so particularly the eastern part of Cuba, right through Hispaniola. There's faults that go there, of course, the Haiti one we mentioned already. Then you go into Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico has a lot of faults. So that's all the northern boundary. If you go down to the south, you've got Venezuela and you've got Trinidad, where, of course, we heard about faults recently moving. They tend to be very deep. So even though they're quite large earthquakes, they tend to be deep, and therefore the waves don't cause much damage.
I think I know the answer to this one, but you said we might get it. Did you start to work out when we might get it?
Well, that's if I could do that, I'd be in a
As I said, I think I kind of know the answer to that one, but there's nothing that tells you. No,
there's nothing that tells us it can happen. But what I would like to see is if the current set of earthquakes slows down, potentially the stress has been released for the present point in time, and that would be good. If we continue seeing these earthquakes, then you still wonder, and particularly if you're stepping across, that is where the the potential is. But I think it's very important that we're aware that we can have this because we can be prepared for it. And being prepared is extremely important with earthquakes.
Quake.
What do you mean by we can be prepared?
Well, you've got to think about when an earthquake happens. So first of all, if an earthquake happens during the day, we're going to see children going back to school very shortly. So people are not going to be at home. They're not going to be family members. People will be at work. And therefore, it's a very different scenario if it happens during the daytime versus where it happens during night. During night, everybody's going to be at home. And most people are going to be at home. There are some people obviously that work throughout night and do night shifts and things. But really, you don't have the same big problem of people then wanting to get home and reunite families. So what you've got to actually start saying is, okay, so when it happens during the day, what plan do we have to put in place? And that's a personal plan.
Yeah.
So, if there's an earthquake, if people are safe, stay where you are until the situation has improved, sort of thing.
We have to go, Professor. That's interesting because I actually thought it would be better if it happened in the day. Yeah. Because while you're asleep and stuff, and you kind of probably panic and don't know what to do. Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome.
I rate you, but I hope you're so wrong. I hope you're so wrong.
I hope I'm wrong as well, but I think you've got to. You've got to talk about.
Come on, I appreciate it, sir. It's important. It's an important discussion. But again, I hope you're wrong.
Professor of Sedimentary Geology at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Simon Mitchell.
When we come back from the break, we look at easing children into their school routines. Stay with us, please. Soon come.